Well, hello and welcome to the Movie Paradise. I am your host, Nathanael Molnár, and this is Movie Night Tonight. How this works is every week we watch a movie and discuss the film in depth. We are currently in the month of October, and October's theme is horror movies, and the film tonight is Ridley Scott's 1979 film, Alien. With me today to talk about Alien is Connor Murphy.
Hello.
So, real quick, Connor, this was your first time watching Alien last night. So real quick, what were your first thoughts and first impressions of Alien?
I was definitely impressed by it. It had the charm of a good late 70s drama. And I think what makes it so great is that it kind of blurs the lines between a sci-fi movie and an action movie and a horror movie and a drama. And it becomes kind of just a all-around good movie.
Yeah.
I definitely would categorize it as sci-fi horror before anything else, but I think that it was a very, very good movie, and that was part of the reason why.
Yeah. And then going into my first thoughts, context, I've seen this movie a whole bunch, probably, I'd say about 15 to 20 times. I've watched it a lot, because, as I was mentioning last night, my dad is a huge Alien fan, and so as soon as I was of the appropriate age to be watching a movie like this, I watched it a ton.
What's the appropriate age?
I think it depends upon the child, and it depends upon the parents.
But what was your appropriate age?
I don't remember when I watched it.
Oh.
I know that I saw Prometheus in theaters, and that was 2012, so I would have been 14, so I probably, and it was definitely a few years before that, so I don't know, maybe 11, 12 maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Yeah, I think this movie has its gory moments, and it is definitely an intense movie, but I'd say I don't think it's necessarily like a super inappropriate movie for a person around that age.
Yeah, definitely, it's not super gory, it's not super violent.
It has its moments.
But I think as a child, just experiencing a few of those moments isn't a bad thing.
Yeah.
And maybe if you see it when you're too young, it can be scarring, but I don't think... You could probably start watching movies like Alien around 9 or 10 even.
Yeah, it might have been around then. Yeah. I don't remember exactly how old I was, but it definitely was a few years before Prometheus came out, and I would have been 14 when Prometheus came out, so around then is my guess.
Yeah.
But let's just dive right into it. One of the things that I always attribute to Alien, and whenever I think of the slow burn film, I think of Alien, because this is very much a slow burn movie. It takes a very long time to get where it's going, but the reason why it works and it's such an effective movie, and I think the reason why we hold it in such high esteem all these years later, is because it doesn't rush anything. It takes its time, and it builds the tension, and it builds everything until you get to the very end where it all comes to a head. And I think my philosophy for slow burn movies is that a slow burn movie is only as good as its payoff. You can have a movie that... The difference between a movie that's just slow and a movie that's a slow burn is where it's going to. And with Alien, we're heading somewhere. And while it's slow, you enjoy it because you know what's coming. And if it's your first time watching Alien, you're intrigued. You're trying to figure out what's going on and where this is heading, and then the payoff is really good. If you're rewatching it, you know where it's going, and you're reveling in the journey towards that ending and towards what it's all going towards. And the difference between that and then a movie that's just slow is that a movie that's just slow doesn't have the payoff. It's not worth the wait. It's slow, and then when you get to the end, you're like, well, that's what it was all going towards. Like, why have I been sitting here for 2 hours? You know? So I definitely think of Alien as the kind of textbook case of a slow burn, but it works.
Yeah. I think the part of the reason that the slow burn works so well is that I felt like I feel the same way as the characters through most of the movie. I feel like when I am first watching it, and that I think this is also why it's hard to categorize it as purely horror, because in a horror movie, they might show you the monster, and you know that the monster is coming after someone. In Alien, you never see the monster until the characters see the monster.
Yeah.
You only see from the perspective of the people on the ship that are being terrorized. And I think I felt like I was in the minds of the characters for a large percentage of the movie.
Yeah.
And I never felt like I was given outsider information, which is an interesting thing for a horror movie. I feel like horror movies often work on outsider information, but that's why I think that I see elements of a drama in Alien, because of this emotional connection to the characters.
Yeah, it definitely, like you said, it does a great job of putting you in the mindset of the characters, and you feel like you're right there with them. And I don't want to get into this quite yet, but that's kind of going along this point that I want to do and comparing it to The Thing, because when you break down the story, they're very similar, and they go for similar things. But I don't want to get into that quite yet. I do want to talk about, because you're talking about it's rooted in the characters, and you're following the events as they happen to the characters. There's no, as you said, outside information. And I think that this is very interesting when you look at the ensemble and the cast, because I know one thing that sticks with me, and I've said, I've seen it like 15, 20 times, but one thing that sticks with me that I remember from the first time that I watched this movie, and I'm curious to know if you thought of it the same way, is I had no clue who the main character was. I had no clue who the protagonist was. At the point that I watched it for the first time, I didn't know Sigourney Weaver was the star of this franchise. I didn't know that Ellen Ripley was like the main character. I just saw a whole bunch of people, and there was no clear protagonist until the very end when you realize it is Ripley who survives throughout the whole thing. And I think that's really interesting, that there is no clear protagonist, and she kind of just rises to the top as everyone else dies off.
Yeah, that definitely rings true to my experience of the film. At first, I thought that Kane would be the star, John Hurt's character. And I think you might have been intended to feel that way for the first beginning of the movie. I think you might have been intended to really relate to Kane. You saw more of him than other characters in the beginning. And I think that might have been done intentionally to make his death more impactful.
Yeah.
But I definitely felt like... So I went into it and I was feeling like he was the main character. But after that, I do think it kind of diffused, and it felt more like an ensemble than any main character. Ash seemed like as much of a main character as anyone else.
Yeah.
So it was pretty crazy to find out what happened with him.
I'm curious to know, since I'm assuming you had no idea that he was a robot until it happened. So and like I've said, I've seen it so many times that I'm further and further away from watching it with fresh eyes. So I'm curious, how does that land for you? Because I know when I was watching it, I was thinking to myself, this movie doesn't establish robots or androids at all before the reveal that he is a robot. And if you're familiar with any of the other movies or the video games or the graphic novels or anything, maybe if you're watching Alien for the first time, you have a sense that there are robots or androids in this movie. But if you don't have any of that and you're watching this for the first time, it kind of comes out of nowhere. But I'm assuming it has the same effect, and that it doesn't feel like, wait, there are robots in this? Well, that came out of nowhere. It has a very deliberate and strong effect.
Yeah, I think the reason that it doesn't feel like it comes out of nowhere, I mean, it comes out of nowhere because you're not expecting it, but the robots thing doesn't faze me. And I think part of that is how well established the character of Mother is. Or I don't know if character is the right word, but it seems like Mother's a character.
She feels like a character.
Although I think that was also, and it probably is how it's held the test of time. The Mother aspect was definitely the weakest part of the film, just the way that, and this happens so often in like 70s, 80s movies. They think that computers can just talk to you and have a conversation. Like, you can just say, what are my odds of survival? And the computer knows the answer to that. And it happened in The Thing, too.
Yeah.
But that felt like the weaker part of the movie, but I think that the fact that Mother was in it made it like established that, you know, it was a possibility, I guess.
Yeah.
And so when Ash turned, I think when I first saw him, you know, seeming to have some other agenda, I thought it was like he was possessed by the alien or something, and so I wasn't 100% sure what was going on. I thought he was some sort of just crazy scientist. I thought that he was just like really prioritizing getting scientific data.
Yeah.
And I mean that is the truth to some degree. But the reveal was definitely shocking.
Yeah.
And it was upsetting too to see him do that. I thought that the alien had got him, which would have been better, I think. But then this happened, and it was like, he's a robot. He was always like this.
Yeah. And there's you might not have picked it up, but I noticed this time, and I don't know if I've even picked it up previous times, was at one point they were talking about Ash before we found out he was a robot. And they were saying, like, can we trust him? We don't really know him. And they're like, yeah, no, we originally had another science officer, and then 2 days before we were supposed to leave, the company replaced him with Ash. And so, and this whole storyline with Ash kind of plays into a larger theme in these alien movies that is this kind of corporate corruption. And that plays a big role in Aliens, which, for anyone listening, in the month of November, we're going to be covering action science fiction films, and Aliens is one of those movies. So we will be watching and talking in depth about Aliens next month. So I don't want to say too much about that actual movie, but that is a theme that is brought up again and is really played out to its full potential in Aliens, I think. But that's a theme and a concept that started here with Ash.
Yeah. That's interesting to think about. Now that I've been creating D&D games, which is a weird thing to bring up in the middle of a movie discussion, but now that I've been, you know, creating storylines for people to play in D&D, I'm noticing, like, I don't know exactly how this movie was developed, but at some point I think they thought, there's this corporation over everything, that's it. We're like, we have a few details of it, but it's only what's important to this narrative. Yeah. And then they thought, okay, what can we do in this world that's another story? And then they saw the corporation, and they're like, we have to expand on that. Yeah. And I think that way when I'm writing things for D&D, and now I'm seeing it in, like, fantasy and sci-fi. Yeah. Anything that requires world building, uses the same ideas.
That's funny because Weyland-Yutani is the name of the company, and their slogan is building better worlds.
There you go, yeah. Yeah. And that's exactly what all of the creators involved in this franchise have done. Just to kind of exploring a world. Yeah. And that's also an interesting concept about world building because, like, this movie, they clearly had a story in mind and they built the world around it. And I think sequels often end up being an exploration of the world and stories arise from that. And now that I'm thinking of that, I really want to watch more movies that do that and see if I can see the commonalities of that. Yeah.
And it's interesting when speaking about Aliens, because I think that's a good point, that sequels often build off of the worlds, not necessarily... Like you were saying, you have your story and you build the world around that, and then sequels build off of the world building. And it's interesting about Aliens is that it does that, but it also builds off of the story. And it's an interesting combination of those things, so I'd be curious to...
Yeah, I'll definitely talk more about this idea when we watch Aliens. Yeah. But I definitely see seeds of it here. I see the kind of things, and the fact that you mentioned what Aliens is about adds to it, but I see the kinds of things that you plant in a story to increase the idea that the world is real. So that's even a D&D concept. There are things like this overarching, like, corporation. The fact that there's a law that says they have to go investigate this. It's just a tiny little detail that they wrote into the script, and it just helps flesh out the world so much more than if it wasn't there.
And anyone listening that maybe doesn't know, D&D is Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah. Just to clarify, in case there's anyone who didn't know that. But yeah, no, the world building, and that brings me to a point I really want to discuss, is because there is a lot of world building, or hints to a larger mythology that they don't talk about in this movie. Specifically, what is known as the space jockey, which is when they
in the ship.
Yes. Yeah. When they enter, so the point in the film where they discover the ship after hearing the distress call and landing on the planet, they discover the ship, and inside they find the giant seat of some sort with some sort of dead creature that's clearly been dead for a while.
Yeah.
With a giant
fossilized.
Yeah, with a giant hole in its chest.
Yeah.
We don't know what that is at first, but we come to find out later what that is.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because I like that there is mythology in a film that's never discussed, at least within this film. Mm-hmm. Part of when Ridley Scott went back and did Prometheus, part of that was to flesh out what is the space jockey, what is all this backstory, and so he does that with later films. But within the context of just Alien, if you're an audience member watching this in 1979 when it comes out, you have all this additional mythology hinted at and shown, but never further discussed. I think it would be a lesser filmmaker would been like, well, we got to somehow tie that into the story, or we don't have it at all. And Ridley Scott knew, no, we can have these little. We can have just a set piece that's a reference to something larger and never discuss it again, never bring it up again. And what does that do? That enriches this mythology.
Yeah.
And like you said, it brings more life to this world.
That's definitely... In D&D, the reason you do it is so that your players feel like they're in a real world. And the same thing about movies. You want to feel like this is really happening in a real world. You get absorbed into it. Mm-hmm. And that can happen a lot more easily if you have these details.
Yeah.
The fact that there is this huge ship and the space jockey and you're not sure... Like, I watched that. I don't know. I still don't know if that was a separate race of aliens and the eggs that were laid were laid there by another species that came and attacked this ship. There are so many possibilities that are in my head just from seeing that scene. And they don't know. And that's another thing. They make me feel like the characters because they don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's pretty much like that throughout the whole film.
Yeah. And part of... I like Prometheus more than most, I think. I have problems with it, and I think one of my problems is that I don't like these movies to kind of lift the veil on some of these things. Like, I like same kind of issues I have with some of this, like the Star Wars prequels and stuff, is that, or even Solo, a Star Wars story that just came out this year, there's stuff that I didn't really need to know explicitly. What it is or how it happened. Just leaving it open-ended, I think. And in the case of Alien, I think that's so much more effective. And I don't know if it necessarily hinders my experience having seen Prometheus and knowing the backstory that Ridley Scott has crafted for the space jockey and what it is and answering those questions that you're saying, because within the context of Prometheus, I know the answer of where did the aliens come from? Or the xenomorphs, as they're called in Aliens. Where did the xenomorphs come from? What is the space jockey? How did it end up there? I know all these answers. And that may bring more dimension to the universe, but that also might just... I don't necessarily need to know all that.
Yeah.
And it's kind of fun that I can speculate myself. And I can... And like you're saying, I can think of all these questions myself.
That is actually... I watched I think it was a Nerdwriter video. Nerdwriter does a lot of videos about just media in general. He's been doing paintings, but he did movies for a while, and one of them was... Or not movies necessarily in this video, but he was talking about how world building works and how sci-fi and fantasy often suffer from how much the author has been world building. A lot of sci-fi and fantasy genres, I think, or genre films, suffer from the amount of exposition they need of the amount of world building that the creators did. You'll see movies that send you through and explain everything about the world. This was a problem that I had with Ready Player One, actually. I felt like the beginning went through and explained everything about the world before you started the actual story.
Yeah.
And that's often a big issue because they're so proud of all the work that they've done on building this world.
Yeah.
And that was a big upside of Alien. It really avoided that and just made you feel like you were being dropped into a world, but you had enough information.
Yeah.
You understood what you had.
Yeah, and I think it makes the screenwriters seem like they have everything figured out.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't even know what the space jockey was.
Oh, yeah.
They just wrote something in there.
Yeah.
And then they just made something and they just dropped it in. And it's easy for them to look like geniuses for creating all this world building and all this mythology and only showing the audience a little bit, but they had no clue what it was.
Yeah.
And that's part of the fun, is that there's just one thing that is really just a throwaway thing.
Mm-hmm.
And yet people, up until 2012 when Prometheus came out, people were talking about and speculating, what is that? What could it be? What's its relation to the xenomorphs? What's its relationship to everything else? Like, just one little tiny second of screen time has captured so many imaginations and have caused so much debate.
Yeah.
And I think what you're saying is that's part of the genius of this movie.
Yeah, definitely. And the fact that, a lesser sci-fi movie might have gone and put a bunch more hints into how this might have to do with the alien and they would have made a bunch of things in that ship that tipped you off to a little bit more information.
Yeah.
But they didn't need to, and they didn't, and that was smart of them. Yeah.
It definitely feels like it gives a good sense of there's history that you get immediately when they walk into this ship. Mm-hmm. There's this sense of something has happened, and these characters, and you along with the characters, are entering into like the remnants of some sort of bloody thing. Because once we get to the end of Alien, we can guess what has happened to the ship. Is that somehow the space jockey had the face hugger, and then the alien burst out of its chest, and then killed it, and killed probably whatever was left on the ship. Mm-hmm. And then we have all the eggs, and then the question becomes, where did the eggs come from? Which is somewhat addressed. Well, not somewhat. Which is addressed in Aliens. Mm-hmm. But it's just it brings up all these questions, and it's a good way for us to be thinking deeper about a movie without, like you said, without it going into any detail on it. It just drops something in there for us to think about on our own time.
And then also to attest to the genius of it, I have thought about it a little bit, but when I left the movie, I wasn't thinking about what was going on in that ship. I wasn't thinking about how those eggs got there. I was thinking about the story. Yeah. Because those are tiny added details to make the story stronger. Yeah. And I think that's because, they could very easily add a bunch of details so that you're thinking about what might have gone on in the world. But that wasn't the purpose of it. The purpose of it was to make you feel like you're stumbling upon a very foreign civilization. Yeah. And it worked to that end. I didn't... When I finished the movie and I was sitting there at the end, nothing was going through my head except, like, wow, what a story. Yeah. So...
And it is a great story.
Yeah.
I think it's a great story, and I think it has strong characters we don't know too much about the characters.
No.
Specifically. But you still... there's still strong characters, and there's still enough behind them that you can feel attached to them. Yeah. And even though you don't know anything about Kane, you know nothing about him really as a character, and who he is, or who he was, or anything like that. You still feel it when you have the chest burster scene. You feel that. You feel everything for these characters. And I think that's part of the genius of this film.
Definitely.
A few things, like, on the technical level that always astound me about this movie is the production design, the sound design, and the score. Mm-hmm. I think they're all phenomenal. Production design, when you're looking at, like, the ships and everything, like, it's you have to keep in mind the historical context of it, because it does have a sort of Star Wars-y feel to it and a 2001 A Space Odyssey feel to it.
Yeah.
It's definitely coming off of the heels of those films, and Alien is coming out just 2 years after Star Wars at this point. But it also feels different.
Yeah.
It has a similar look and feel to Star Wars in terms of design, but it also feels more lived in, and it feels darker, and it feels grittier, and I think that kind of goes along with the tone of the film.
Yeah.
Because really where Alien came from is that they're looking at the success of Star Wars, and they're saying, let's do a Star Wars film, but how can we do it different?
Yeah.
And they say, well, let's go in more of a horror route. Let's have it be people against an alien like this, and that's kind of how this is born.
And this was probably... I'm not a huge scholar on the topic, but it seems like this isn't from a time period that horror sci-fi had been relatively untouched for a while.
Yeah.
You've seen movies like Invasion of the Body Snatchers or War of the Worlds is in a similar vein, but I feel like horror sci-fi was probably, like the genre as we know it today, was probably spurred in large part due to Alien.
Yeah, it definitely is like a first of its kind.
Yeah.
And a very unique film for the time it was coming out.
Yeah.
And like the sound design, I think is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Like when you for me at least, all the sounds are just so iconic, and I immediately hear them and I think of Alien. Like the sounds of the computers and the sounds of all the different sounds on the ship and everything. It has a very distinct sound in a very similar way that Star Wars has a very distinct sound design.
Yeah.
When you hear the TIE Fighter, you immediately know that's from Star Wars. And you have a similar thing with Alien.
I think, and this is true of most good horror movies that I've seen, I feel like part of why it's so great is the amount of restraint they use. They never fill a space with sound when it doesn't need to be.
Yeah.
And they let the small sounds that they have shine through. And the music is very minimal to kind of accentuate these sounds in the environment. Small things. Like, one thing I noticed was when the aperture of the air duct closes up, you really hear that sound.
Yeah.
And that really sticks out. And
the sound effects are very loud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For small things that probably wouldn't be nearly as loud.
Yeah. And I think that kind of goes into the tagline for the film on all the posters was, in space, no one can hear you scream. And I think they definitely, even just from, like you were saying, the sound design and not filling the quiet moments with the score as much. And just letting these quiet moments breathe and just letting them be quiet, and that kind of has the sound effects kind of rise to the top, and they're more prevalent and you hear them more, and like you said, they're a lot louder than they normally are, and and I think that adds to it, and I definitely think the sound effects add to the tension themselves. And I don't know, I just think the sound design is really well done, and the score as well. I think I didn't realize how recognizable the score is until I heard it this time. And when you hear the theme, I don't think people talk about the score for Alien as much as they should.
I haven't heard
it's
been talked about it.
It's a fantastic theme. It's very distinct and recognizable for the property.
As somebody who saw it for the first time, it doesn't seem like it is, but I imagine that I would hear it out of context and recognize it.
Yeah. I don't know. I just, when I hear it, I think it's very distinct for Alien. And so, moving in the same vein of design, the creature design is phenomenal. And I think this is the single best design for an alien creature ever. I mean, you have different, movies to have a lot of good ones. Like, Star Wars has a bunch of great creature designs. But I think for the single best alien creature design, nothing beats Alien.
I don't know if I've seen enough movies to really agree or disagree on that, but
yeah.
I definitely liked it. One small issue I have, and this is just as a slightly scientifically oriented person, I hate the fact that aliens are so often humanoid. I feel like that it's pretty unlikely that you're going to find a distant species that's humanoid.
Yeah.
But that's a small nitpicky thing. I do think it was very well designed. And I also think that was probably a result of just wanting to have a good performance.
Yeah.
And so they made it humanoid so that a human could play it.
Mm-hmm.
Which, that makes sense. That's a constraint. But I think that it's very well designed beyond that point. And it does... It does well to get rid of the humanoid aspects of it and, obscure them by making you focus on the fact that it has a mouth that comes out of its mouth.
Yeah.
And the strange head shape and things like that. Its lack of eyes are a great way to obscure its humanity.
And the protrusions on its back.
Yeah, exactly. There are plenty of ways that they try to make it less human.
Yeah.
Which work. They make it into a very inhuman creature. The only time that I would say that I really noticed that it was a humanoid creature, I mean, was in the very end when it's on Ripley's ship.
Yeah.
When it's like moving its arms out of the whatever it's stuck in or whatever.
Yeah.
I feel like in that moment I could see that it was a person in a costume.
Yeah, there are a couple moments. I think overall, this movie does a fantastic job in hiding its budget.
Mm-hmm.
And it does and I think not many movies follow their example in less is more. Mm-hmm. And the less amount of screen time you give the alien, the better it is going to be. And I think there's maybe 2 shots that stood out to me like, oh, you could have done without that one because that very clearly looks like a guy in a costume. Mm-hmm. There's probably 1 or 2 shots that maybe they shouldn't have done, but maybe the editors are sitting there like, there's no way we can get from this to this without having this one shot in here, so we just got to bite the bullet and do it. Yeah. But, and I think...
It doesn't take away from the story either.
No.
I wasn't taken out of it by noticing that. It just... felt much more like a humanoid alien because of seeing that.
Yeah. But I think this moves us into a larger point in that Alien is famous for not showing the alien a lot at all. Like, I would be very curious to know the exact amount of screen time the creature actually has.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure it's under 10 minutes.
Yeah.
It's probably like 5-6 minutes of actual... Well, I don't even know. Of actual screen time because a lot of it is fleeting shots, so I don't even know.
Yeah.
But it kind of... It goes into this idea of the lack of screen time for the alien is coincidental because they didn't have the budget to show a full alien all the time on screen and have it look good. Yeah. Even the couple of shots that we had where we saw it completely... you could tell as a person in a costume.
Yeah.
And so the need to... Because you don't have a big budget, you can't show your creature enough. But that is what makes it work, is because it's so much scarier when you see it in bits and pieces than seeing it all at once.
Yeah.
And Jaws kind of went through the same thing. Famously, they didn't have the book. They had... Well, I don't remember the exact story, but I think it was...
Their shark malfunctioned.
Yeah, that's what it was. Their shark malfunctioned, so as a result, they couldn't have had that much shark in the movie. But that's what makes the movie work so well, is that you don't have the shark in it that much.
Yeah.
And it's all about building tension through a shark POV and having John Williams score. Mm-hmm. Alien is so effective because it's all about where is it? And you have the brilliant use, and they capitalize. And one of the reasons why I think Aliens is a tiny bit better of a film than this, I like it just a little bit more than this one, is that they take the motion tracker to the next level. And that sound of dit, 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 and you don't see it, you have no idea where it is, but you know it's there. That is brought to the next level. But that's something that comes out of this movie because they don't have the budget. They're like, well, how can we have the alien have a presence without showing it? It's creating that atmosphere of, you know it's here, you know it's somewhere, but you have no idea where it is. And that is more terrifying than having an alien creature that you show throughout the whole movie that people look at it and get sick of.
Definitely, yeah. And that's also part of, like, lesser horror movies show a lot of their creature because, they want to, and it's scary to see the creature, but that they would have strayed away from the idea of being exactly in the mindset of the characters throughout the whole movie if you had seen more of the alien, I think.
Yeah.
Or the alien would have just been less of a scary monster because it would have been attacking all the time. It would have just been violent.
Yeah.
Probably would have killed them all right away.
Mm-hmm.
And so sustaining a movie on a monster that shows up every 5 seconds is a lot harder.
And there are so many long spells of the alien not showing up at all.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's very much staggered throughout the film when it actually comes out. And I think going back to the idea of the motion tracker, going to that scene where, I think it was Dallas, was in going through the air ducts.
Yeah.
He was trying to find it, and they had the motion tracker, like, okay, it's nearby, it's coming, it's right there, it's right on top of you. And he's like, I can't see it, I don't know what's going on. And then all of a sudden, the alien just pops out of nowhere, and immediately it cuts.
Yeah. That was one of the best shots of the alien. I very distinctly remember that.
And it was like, 3-second shot of the alien? But you felt it. You felt the alien was there, and you felt this impending doom, that something was happening, something was coming.
Yeah. And I think that also, small thing, you see the genius of the alien design. In that shot, you can see just the silhouette of the alien, and the main thing that stands out is the glinting silver teeth.
Mm.
And the fact that they gave it silver teeth like that, the shot was almost entirely black because the alien is entirely black except for the silver teeth.
Yeah.
So you see that and you instantly know, and that they show the part that's strongest of the alien there without showing any of the human characteristics that weaken it.
Yeah. No, I just always find it how errors in filmmaking lead to the best filmmaking.
Mm.
That you think when you're making a film, oh, we don't have a big budget. This is going to be hard on our film, and we have to find shortcuts, and we have to find leeway, and we have to do all these different things to accommodate the fact that we don't have a big budget, and that makes the film stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And I just always find that funny, how things that when you're making a movie seem like mistakes or seem like problems end up being for the better of the film.
Yeah.
And make it a stronger movie. I just always find that fascinating.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's not mistakes as much as it is things going wrong. Well, in the
case of Jaws, say, maybe.
Yeah.
Because they would view, oh, we built this great shark prop and then it malfunctioned and now we can't use it. How do we get around that?
Yeah, it's more about how they deal with the constraint, whether it happens from a mistake or their budget or whatever. When they are constrained more, great filmmakers do better work. Yeah,
and I think, going off on a little bit of a side tangent, I think that's one of the reasons why the Star Wars prequels suffered, is because when George Lucas was making Star Wars, he didn't have an unlimited budget, and he wasn't surrounded by people saying yes to everything he said. Mm-hmm. Everyone was telling him no, and he had a shoestring budget, and he had to just do what he could with what he had, and that's how you get this great movie. And then with the prequels, he had unlimited budget, could do whatever he wanted, and nobody said no. And the product is a mediocre at best, leaning towards a not very good movie.
Yeah. I think this might actually be getting at the core of my issue with modern fantasy sci-fi movies, the superhero movies included. I feel like it's these movies that have the potential to spend so much money on special effects and world building and things like that. And it's when they are constrained to having less money to spend on those things that it becomes a great movie. And I think a lot of modern movies that have huge budgets for making, great special effects and stuff suffer because they can do whatever they want.
See, but I don't think the correlation isn't necessarily, if you have a big budget, you're worse film. I think it's more, what do the filmmakers do in those, and I think that's how you get these brilliant filmmakers who are like, okay, I want to do this, but I can't do this. And I want to do this, but I can't do that. So what can I do instead? Yeah. And then that's how it's born. So I don't think it's necessarily, we have a $250 million budget that we can spend on all these special effects, and that in of itself dilutes the film. Yeah. I think it's more when filmmakers, and specifically directors, are under the weather or they have all these constraints and restrictions, that they make better choices for the film.
Yeah. I think they're getting at the core of what the film needs.
Yeah.
Because they have to think about, I can only do so many things. Mm-hmm. What things do I need to do? And I think large budget makes it easier to think, oh, I can do everything. I can do this and this and this. So why do I need to think about what the film needs? Yeah. Because I can think about what I want to put in.
Yeah.
And still, a good filmmaker will deal with that well.
Yeah.
But...
And case in point, George Lucas with Star Wars and then going into the prequels. And I think not to the same extent, but along the same lines, Peter Jackson with Lord of the Rings and then The Hobbit.
Yeah.
And I still think the Hobbit movies are good movies. But I do think he kind of suffered from a little bit of the same thing as George Lucas did with the prequels, is that he had unlimited budget, he could do whatever he wanted, and it took away that indie filmmaking edge that filmmakers like Ridley Scott in the case of Alien has.
Yeah.
That I don't have a big budget, I can't do whatever I want, so I gotta find ways around it.
Yeah. Maybe we'll have a resurgence of lower budget and indie filmmakers making horror and sci-fi and fantasy.
I think you do see that. You do see in the if you look at a lot of these smaller horror companies like Blumhouse, A24, they do
there
the
are
Conjuring
horror movies coming back, definitely.
The Conjuring movies are all made like under $20 million. Get Out was made for $4 million. Wow. So you do see a lot of horror movies and movies along these lines that are made for smaller budgets. I don't think there are too many horror movies that are big budgeted films.
There are a lot of fantasy and sci-fi though. I think fantasy and sci-fi movies have been increasing, or if you took an average budget of fantasy sci-fi, I would even go as far as to say genre films in general. Yeah, they probably have been increasing in average budget over the years. I bet there are less smaller productions being made.
I agree with that. And I think that kind of stems from the fact that these movies have been doing so well. Yeah. That they were made for smaller budgets, but then people really liked them and got to see them. And then as more people see these movies, the studios give more money to them. And then pretty soon we have Marvel movies being made for $250 million, but they make $2 billion at the box office. Yeah. So the studio doesn't see a reason why can't we spend $250 million on this movie.
Yeah, definitely.
And I don't, going back to what we were saying, I don't know if that's necessarily to the detriment of the film. I don't think the fact that the Avengers has a $200 million budget takes anything away from how good of a movie that is. And I don't think the Avengers would necessarily be a better film if it had less of a budget. And I don't think it necessarily would be better if it had more of a budget. I think it's still, the story is still as strong as the story is. The characters are still as strong as the characters are. But I think then you have certain situations like an Alien, like a Jaws, like a Star Wars, where the filmmakers have all these ambitions and all these aspirations of where they want to take the film and the story and the worlds, and they can't do all that. And then the best products are born out of not having all the resources available. Yeah. And that's how we get something like Alien. Because if they had the budget, like say Alien was made for, well, I don't know, let's say it was a bigger budget. I don't want to guess a number because it would be disproportionate now to 1979. But let's say Alien was made with a bigger budget.
You would see a lot more of the Alien.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. You would see a ton more of the Alien.
And the Alien would probably look better, but that doesn't matter to the story.
It wouldn't tease the Alien. Yeah. It wouldn't work to create the atmosphere and the tension. Yeah, definitely. And it wouldn't be building towards something. It would just be showing something. Yeah. That would be to the detriment of this particular film.
Yeah. And you have been hinting at wanting to compare it to The Thing. And I think that is a good comparison to draw. That I feel like Alien is a significantly better movie than The Thing. And I think
before we get into this, I just want to say, for anyone who doesn't know, The Thing was our last week's movie that we talked about. So we're not just pulling The Thing out of nowhere. Yeah. We watched it yesterday, or last week, and I think there are comparisons to be made. And I didn't necessarily beforehand think of these comparisons until after I watched Alien. I sat down and I was like, wow, Alien and The Thing have very strong comparisons. But go ahead, sorry.
I think that The Thing is a weaker film than Alien because it shows too much. I think the part of the reason, and I still think The Thing is a good movie, but I think it suffers from showing too much of its monster and of the aftermath of its monster, and that's where the Alien really that's where Alien really shines is. And you can see, I think, the difference between the two movies, and I think that's a big part of it.
See, I agree with you to an extent. Where I would disagree is that The Thing doesn't have a set monster, like Alien. What we see in all the practical effects and everything is how an alien organism is mutating things, and so all we see are the mutations. And everything that we see is completely different than what we've seen before. They're all different mutations and different things. I think it would be a little bit different if there was a set monster for The Thing, and we saw that as much, like, if that was given as much screen time as all the practical effects were in The Thing.
Yeah.
But I think it's a little bit different.
Yeah, definitely. But I also think The Thing could have been a stronger film if it focused more on the times when you weren't sure if a person had been taken by the alien parasite.
Yeah.
Those were the strongest parts of the film, honestly. Their distrust of each other.
Yeah.
And so that distrust and that creeping terror could have been definitely capitalized on had the, mutations had less screen time.
Yeah. And not to get off into a whole thing on The Thing, but I do think, and when we were discussing The Thing last week, one of the things I said was that there is a large portion in that film between when we have the scene with the dog, and then to the next instance of where we see The Thing. There's a whole portion where nothing happens in terms of like practical effects or the alien or anything like that, and that
is them.
I don't think it's as scarce as an Alien, but I do think they do a good job of teasing out The Thing, and then once you see it, you see it. But one of the points you made about The Thing, and we talked about it a little bit last week, even though you weren't on the show, you had mentioned that you thought The Thing was too gory.
Yes.
And so I'm curious, do you see that being the case with Alien?
No, not at all. I think Alien's very strategically placed its gory moments to shock you and scare you. I can only think of 2 gory moments. One of the alien attacks and the chest burster. And I can't, I'm trying to think of anything else that was super gory. I mean, I wouldn't call it gory, but definitely like body horror, I guess, is when the facehugger was on Kane. But I feel like it used those moments to its advantage more than anything else. Yeah. I felt like my issue with The Thing was that it felt like it was shock value. It felt like they wanted, like, the gore was part of what was scary. Where in Alien, it was this creeping terror, which I think is almost always a better thing in a horror movie. I feel like gore is scary, but it's not surreal enough for horror movies, in my opinion. When you're going for something surreal, you have to kind of remove the realistic elements like gore. Yeah. And I think that's what makes great horror. In my opinion, I'd love to talk to somebody who really strongly believes that gore can be a great horror movie. I think
gore can be used effectively.
Definitely.
And I think, in my personal opinion, I think The Thing utilizes gore effectively. And I think that adds to it. But, and not to get into a whole thing on The Thing, but with Alien in particular, I think it definitely like you said, very strategically utilizes gore, specifically that chest burster scene. Yeah. And every time I watch Alien, I am always surprised by how short that scene is. Because in my head, it is much longer. In my head, it's a far longer scene, but then when we watch it, I don't know exactly, but it has to be maybe 2 minutes? Yeah. Maybe?
Yeah.
of from when Kane starts coughing to when the alien bursts out of his chest. It's a very quick scene. And there aren't a lot of like long shots just looking at all the blood and all the gore. It's very quick shots and just gets to the point and then moves on.
Yeah.
But it has such staying power because of what is going on and what it means for the characters and what is happening, and just the terror of everything seems fine, but very quickly everything is not fine.
And it's coming right off the heels of the moment you feel like Kane's back and you're happy for him.
Yeah.
So it definitely is effective in that. I think it's the first time that you are really, like, you have an idea of what's going on up until that point, I feel like. And this is when you realize that, like, this thing is out. It's, like, around, and it could do anything you don't know. It's a great way to expose something that is such, you never know where it is.
Yeah.
And it starts from, you don't even think it's there. You don't think it's anywhere.
Yeah.
And then it suddenly is.
You think it's over.
Yeah. And that's a great way to introduce the character of the alien. And I also think it's a great way to start off. There's a real change in tone of the film at that point, I feel like. They have it almost contained up until that point, and as soon as that happens, you have no idea what could happen.
Yeah.
The only time before that you really feel scared is, like, they go near Kane while he has the thing on his face. And it's like, what could happen if they do that? But now, anything could happen at any time.
Yeah. That's where it really turns into the horror movie.
Yeah.
Before then, I think it's more suspense.
Yeah.
And then that's where it becomes the horror. And one thing I really noticed when we watched it last night was they take very specific precautions in making sure that everything feels logical. And I think specifically to the scene where Ripley is obeying protocol for quarantine. And they're like, we got to bring him in because at this point Kane has the face hugger on. And they're like, well, we got to bring him in and we got to do tests and everything. And in the moment, you're caught up with those characters, and it makes complete sense. You're like, yeah, get him in there because he's about to die, or you have no idea what's going on with him. Yeah. He has some sort of alien attached to his face. Who knows what's going on? We got to bring him in and we got to save him.
Yeah.
And you get caught up in that moment, and then Ripley's like, no, quarantine. We got to obey it. We got to respect it, and that feels right. And so you're caught up in the moment with the characters trying to save his life, but you're also respecting this, because there's this idea in horror movies that, like, oh, characters don't act logically. If we were in that situation, we would act like this, but the characters are acting like this to push the plot forward.
Yeah.
But Ripley acts very exactly how she should act in that situation, which is, we have no idea what's going on. We can't risk bringing him on.
Yeah.
And that also gives an insight into her character and how she looks at things and how she operates.
Yeah.
And then who is it that breaks protocol and lets someone in? It's Ash.
Yeah.
Who we then find out would have ulterior motives for doing what he's doing. He's not just, the stupid guy in the movie who was like, don't touch the thing. And then there's the stupid guy in the movie who touches the thing. And that lets the creature in or whatever. How many times have we seen that? But in this case, it was Ash, who we later find out has very clear reasons for doing what he's doing.
Yeah. I also think that you said, you always go into a horror movie expecting to see people doing stupid things.
Yeah.
I think this movie doesn't set you up to feel like you're in a horror movie. You're surprised.
It becomes
by
a horror movie.
Yeah, you're surprised by the horror the same way the characters are.
Yeah.
They don't. It's not like first 10 minutes of the film they realize they're alone in the woods and there's a monster outside. Yeah. It's very slow to build up to that point. And so I at no point did I feel like this is a horror movie and I know what's going to happen because of all the tropes. Yeah. In the beginning of the film, it doesn't feel like a horror movie at all.
No, not at all. Yeah. And that definitely is one of its advantages. And that brings it back to the slow burn.
Yeah, definitely.
So moving into final thoughts, Alien is it's in my top 20, I'd say, all-time favorite movies. I love this film. I love, like I said, it's a textbook case of the slow burn. I think it uses it so effectively, and I think you'd be hard-pressed to find many other movies that do it as well as Alien. And it's because it's going somewhere. And once you get to that place of where it is going, it's well worth the wait. And it makes the wait even more enjoyable because you know what's coming. I love all the design elements, the production design, the sound design, the score, the creature design, I think is absolutely iconic. I love how it hints at the larger mythology. I love how it does all these things and set all these things up. And as we've been talking about for the past hour, it's rooted in character and it's rooted in story. And you're following these characters. You're along with them. And so when you encounter the horror is when they encounter the horror. And that makes it all the more effective. And of course, the horror is as effective as it is because they don't show a ton of it. They don't explicitly show it. They hint at it. They tease it. And you feel it. It lets your imagination run wild. You, instead of showing you that the alien is here, they don't tell you where the alien is. And then it's up to you to start wondering, well, where is the alien? Where could it be? And so that makes it the more effective movie. So I love this movie. I think it's fantastic. I love it. And I think it's just slightly beaten by Aliens, which Alien is in my top 20. Aliens is in my top 10.
I'm excited to see that, though.
Yeah. I don't know if you'll... I feel like they're very different movies because Alien is science fiction horror. Aliens is science fiction action horror. And I think a lot of people overlook the horror elements that are in Aliens. And I think there are very clear horror moments in that movie. And I think that's one of the reasons why it works so well, is that it doesn't completely ignore where it's coming from.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people would just say, oh, well, Alien is very clearly this kind of movie, and Aliens is very clearly that kind of movie. But I think there are a lot of horror elements in Aliens that makes it feel consistent with what's come before. And I think even enhance the action and enhances the overall film.
I definitely, I'm looking forward to it. I'm interested to see how that changes it for me. If you like it that much more, I definitely will be, looking for what makes it such a great movie.
Yeah.
I think this film is definitely Alien. I haven't seen Aliens, obviously. I found that Alien was a very, very good horror movie. I would definitely, at least in the realm of horror movies, it's probably in my top 10 horror movies. I haven't seen a huge amount of horror movies, so I can't, that doesn't mean as much as it might mean for your top 10 horror movies. But it definitely, and I generally, there are a lot of horror movies I don't like.
Yeah.
So I like this one, and that says something. So it's definitely up there with some of the best horror movies I've seen. And I feel like, that's in large part due to the restraint that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Which that's something that is usually a little bit less in action movies. They tend to show less restraint. And so I'm wary of that for Aliens.
You definitely see more of the aliens in that than you do in this.
Yeah.
They don't tease it. There are definitely moments of teasing out and teasing it out. And I think those moments are incredibly effective in that movie. And almost, I think they even build the suspense even more in that movie than they do in this. But you definitely see a lot more aliens.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why it's plural. Because there's a lot of aliens in that one. And I don't want to get too much into Aliens because I think they're very different movies, and I like them for very different reasons.
Yeah.
But yeah, this one I think is phenomenal.
Definitely.
Alien is a phenomenal movie.
Yeah.
So this has been our discussion of the 1979 Ridley Scott film Alien as part of our horror movie month. And a little taste of what is to come. Next week, we are discussing Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. So start watching it now. Watch it so that you can join us next week for our discussion of that film. Well, once again, I am your host, Nathanael Molnár. Thank you so much for listening, and I've been joined by Connor Murphy. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. And be sure to follow us on our various social medias at MovieParadise99. And until we discuss Psycho next week, thanks everyone.